Earlier the week, as I settled in for movie night with the missus in my decommissioned lighthouse on the craggy Newfoundland shore, I pulled out my trusty home entertainment system, MacGyvered up a makeshift projector out of a shoebox, a beer bottle heel and some tape, and got cozy in the lantern room to beam a legally obtained copy of the new Joker film onto the gathering clouds. Now, I loved the first Joker, but as good as it was, I always figured it for kind of an accidental triumph. I never attributed much of its success to director Todd Phillips. I saw the first two Hangovers. Joker's borrowed brilliance lay in the shameless Scorsese cosplay and inspired performance of Joaquin Phoenix. So when the first news broke of his sequel, I don't think anyone was confident in lightning striking twice. I knew Phoenix was game for a repeat performance, but I also suspected Phillips wasn't. When the news dropped that it was to be a musical, I briefly entertained a faint hope that miracles sometimes happen. But the second I saw Gaga's name attached, I knew this slop was going to flop. But this follow-up was plagued with more problems than its tragic new casting. The politically charged fallout from the first installment, for one. Amidst the immense popularity of the first film, the general cry of the leftist critics who tilted at those incel windmills was, "You're not supposed to like him. He's the bad guy." But if you ask me, they were just upset that someone outside their tribe made a film about the things they pretend to care about. And that seemed to be a good enough reason to suddenly lose all basic understanding of the long-running Hollywood narrative tradition of the antihero. Of course we rooted for him. That doesn't mean we're secret psychos, just excited nerds. We're Dwight, or maybe Kevin, but we're not Creed.
Let's put a smile on that face.
And back in 2019, Todd Phillips seemed to understand that. In response to the backlash, he defended his prerogative as an artist to court controversy and start difficult conversations. He also defended his audience's common sense at the time, saying, "The movie makes statements about a lack of love, childhood trauma, lack of compassion in the world. I think people can handle that message." So it's hard to figure out why or when he lost faith in his viewers' abilities to think for themselves. All the moral panic over newly incited incels shooting up theaters was empty hysteria, and the media's straw-man portrayal of its fans was just that, untrue, unreal, and unjustified. But with this second film, it's painfully clear that Phillips has come to share the same view of his audience as the rest of his California cultural vultures, as malleable simpletons in dire need of moral education by way of their mediocre movies. So what happened? Was he abducted into a re-education camp and forced to commit seppuku by sequel, to atone for his crime of riling up the kind of men the first film had dared to show sympathy for? Maybe he just missed being invited to the good parties. Or maybe he genuinely regretted making a hero out of a deeply disturbed killer and sought to redress that mistake by punishing his fans with this tedious, muddled mess. Perhaps his insomnia-curing conceit of a courtroom drama was a ham-fisted allegory for his internal crisis of conscience. If the man thought he had pulled the pin on a provocation grenade with the first film, I'll give him this. He sure threw himself on it with this one. So let's get into it. The plot is a mostly pointless, listless relitigation of the events of its predecessor, and apparently expects us to be fascinated by the question of whether Fleck and his alter ego are truly split from one another. Nearly as uninteresting as the titular Folie Deux, which here is less a shared delusion than a clumsy metaphor for a toxic stan enabling and manipulating a dangerous man, seemingly for the sole purpose of teaching us why we were stupid enough to even like Joker in the first place. Chemistry between the two leads is utterly absent, not least because the duo is the thespian equivalent of a bout between Tyson and Tiny Tim. But what about the tunes? Well, it's impossible to understate how quickly and completely each musical number castrates the dramatic moment it's presumably intended to punctuate. For many of them, Gaga makes a character choice to sing like someone who can't sing, which results in performances hamstrung by stilted restraint. For others, her inability to suppress her 21st century diva vocal stylings is jarringly anachronistic. Phoenix also adopts the voice of someone who can't sing, but his parts often sound obviously and overly auto-tuned. No song or even moment really hits, and the musical gimmick doesn't ever not feel shoehorned in. It was a lofty idea dreamed up by a director high on hubris who wasn't talented nor imaginative enough to make it work. Nevertheless, on some level, I do admire the ambition behind the format, and I could even have seen this working had it adopted, say, a sleazy nightclub cabaret vibe and gotten a bit blue with it, instead of the clean-cut old Broadway style they employed instead. It's also poorly conceived. One can't help but ask the glaring question, why was this even made? Why, indeed. In a remarkably unself-aware moment during one musical dream sequence, Fleck becomes suspicious that his vehicle has been usurped and is now the Gaga show. Seconds later, the film's self-awareness comes flooding back as Phillips, through Fleck, reveals its real thesis to his imagined audience.
We're not giving the people what they want.
And so it becomes clear that Phillips learned something very important on his quixotic quest to flush 20 million clams down this celluloid toilet. That Joker was never the real villain. The real villains were the fans he made along the way. As far as performances go, Phoenix is reliable, but intentionally hamstrung by the narrative. Gleason is dependably good. Catherine Keener phones in her performance as Fleck's attorney. Lee Gill delivers a perfect performance as Gary Puddles that seems as though it should have been part of a better film. And Steve Coogan is an absolute pleasure to see as TV pundit Paddy Myers, despite being more underutilized than Gaga could ever be. We already know the script was repeatedly trashed and rewritten on napkins during filming, so perhaps Coogan's sensationalistic, fame-hungry TV personality was originally intended to be a more central character in some abandoned iteration of this confused conceit. I would have been far more interested in a film about Fleck and Myers' opportunistic manipulation of each other and the news media at large, instead of whatever this is. Now, it's time to get real. This next part is not for Gaga fans, so fair warning, little monsters, or whatever ye call yourselves. I know any suggestion that she's not the Immaculate Conception herself puts ye in fits like a Muslim seeing Mohammed's mug in a Marmaduke. So just cover your ears, yell rah, rah, ah, 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 and turn your head until your darkness goes, I suppose. All right, now that it's just the grown-ups. You know, it's remarkable that not even a single media outlet can bring themselves to even suggest that Gaga's inclusion or performance in this film was anything but magnificent, if underutilized. They gush about how not even she could save this movie, that it commits the cardinal sin of wasting her unfathomable talents. Rolling Stone referred to her unironically as her Gaga-ness, and Joker fans are supposed to be the cringy ones. I'll go ahead and posit an alternative assessment that doesn't come from direly out-of-touch, apparatus-approved cheerleaders. The announcement of her casting in this was the primary, or at least secondary reason nobody showed up. Well, nobody who loved the first one anyway. But don't take my word for it. I got receipts. Of course, the goo-goo for Gaga Hollywood press can't even conceive of such a horror. IndieWire published an ostensibly bewildered article, conspicuously omitting any image of the toxic titular character in their promo photo and feigning obliviousness as to what could possibly have tipped fans off that they were downwind of a doozy of a dung heap. Their best theory? It wasn't a DC Studios film.
You sure about that? You sure about that? That's why?
I think for most of these rags, having this movie flop was ultimately more desirable than their pop queen renewing its eponymous protagonist's politically problematic popularity.
Let Lily lick Lionel's lusty leathers.
Now, I'm certainly not the only filmgoer who thinks Gaga should stick to her god-awful music, if that. She's one of them new crop of method actors who really needs you to know it, and I've always held a firm belief that good performance speaks for itself. The more an actor talks about their process, the worse their acting tends to be. So, as a bonus for sticking with me this far, here's a supercut of Mother Monster herself pontificating on the perilous profundity of her cinematic self-sacrifice. Enjoy. And until next time, long may your big jib draw.
You stayed in character. How do you not take that darkness home with you after work?
Well, you know, unfortunately, Mark, I do. Yeah, I do. And I have a really hard time with that. Well, I was the same way for A Star is Born. I was always Allie. For this, I was always Patrizia. I always spoke in my accent.
Father, son, and house of Gucci.
I wasn't pretending that
Right.
I brought the darkness with me. That was hugely traumatizing for her. And so hugely traumatizing for me, and I took it home. I stayed down there as long as I could, and when I came up for air, I remember thinking to myself, I want to live. My intention as the actress was for her to ask herself that question when she went under, but when I came up, I said, I want to live.
I find it very interesting that you have such a strong connection to that which is not yours.
There's this darkness that you might take home with you. If I'm being honest, I had a psychiatric nurse with me towards the end of filming. So I sort of felt like I had to. I felt that it was safer for me. I really wish to not glorify that in any way.
No, of course, yeah.
And I don't think that like any actor should push themselves to that limit. And I ask myself all the time why I do that. I've done some pretty extreme art pieces. It's like a walnut of sadness in my stomach as I say this to you. I don't know why I'm like that, Mark. The best answer I could give you is that I have a sort of romantic relationship with suffering for your art. It just sometimes goes too far. And when it does go too far, it can be hard to reel it in on your own. And I think it's okay to ask for help. It's not a secret that I'll do anything for art. I often ask myself to protect my inner child while I'm working so that I am not harmful to myself. One of the greatest performances I think I ever gave, it was serious and it was real. And I really went there. And also, I don't encourage anyone to do that. That's part of my existential crisis as an artist, is that I felt compelled to do it. I really wish not to glorify it, because I wish for people to, be safe and to care about their mental health.
So brave.
That's all, folks.